Hey guys, this is Stacy from EatTheBite.com, and today I'm making an old family recipe we call Mrs. Mann's steak and sausage pie. Let me show you how to make it. It starts with the meat. If there's too much fat on the meat you bought, just give it a little trim. We want some of the fat for flavor, but if it's hanging off, cut it. Now we need to cut the beef down into bite-sized pieces. I cut a chunk in half, then cut it into thick strips, and then cut it again into smaller cubes. Here's what it should look like when you're finished. Put the beef in a large mixing bowl, then we'll add a little flour. Just give it a toss with your hands until all the beef chunks are coated in the flour. I've got a little oil heating in a pan, and then I added the meat to the pan. We just need to spread it out so the pieces don't get stuck together when they're browning. I've got my heat on medium-high, and you want to cook this for about 3 to 4 minutes on each side. Really, enough time that you get a good sear on the outside like you see here. Then we'll add water, enough to just cover the meat. 1 bouillon cube. Then we're going to turn the heat on high and bring it to a boil. And you want to give it a stir while it's coming to a boil. Then we're going to put the cover on the pan and turn the heat down to low and simmer this for 40 minutes. It's time to cut the sausage. I stuck these in the freezer for an hour so they'd be a little easier to cut. Basically, you want to cut the sausage into bite-sized pieces just like you did with the beef. And here's what it should look like. Now we need to finely dice some onion. I've sliced down one side of my onion, then I'll rotate it to dice it into smaller bits. And this is finely diced, so you'll need to run your knife over the onions a few more times. Our beef has simmered for 40 minutes, and now we'll add the sausage. You want to give it a good mix around and break up any sausage pieces that might be sticking together. Next, we'll add the onions. And we're going to give that another good stir around. Then you'll need to cover the steak and sausage and simmer it on low heat for another 45 minutes. While all the meat is simmering, we need to make a slurry to thicken the sauce, which is equal parts flour and water. Just mix it together until everything is well combined. We typically use a store-bought pie crust for this, and you'll need 2 of them since we're cooking this in a 9 by 13 baking dish. Just put them on your cutting board and hold your baking dish over the dough to make sure it will fit, and that looks about right. I did roll over the dough a little just to even it out, but this is optional. We're going to leave that alone for a minute while we add that slurry to our beef mixture. So I poured that in and I added a little butter, and then I mixed everything together until it's well blended. We are going to let that sit for a few minutes to thicken, and when it looks approximately like this, it's time to assemble the pie. We're going to pour the entire filling into the 9 by 13 baking dish, and once you spread it out evenly, it's time to add the crust to the top. Just lay it across the top and fold the sides in. You don't have to fuss too much, it doesn't need to be perfect. Next, we're going to brush a little egg wash on the top, which is beaten egg with a splash of water. Last step is to poke a few vent holes in the pie, and then we're going to bake it in a preheated oven at 400 degrees for about 30 to 40 minutes until the crust is golden brown. For those of you who want to make a homemade crust, I'll show you real quick how to do that. First, you're going to cut a bunch of butter and some vegetable shortening into cubes. Then we'll take the butter and vegetable shortening and throw it in a bowl with a bunch of flour. We'll add a little bit of salt and a little sugar. And then we're going to start mixing it either with a pastry cutter or just with your hands like I'm doing. It will start to get crumbly as you mix it. And when it looks approximately like this, it's time to add really cold water. I added 2 tablespoons and that's all I needed. So I did one final mix of the dough to bring it all together. And I've got a big lump of dough here. Next thing I did is I shaped it into a ball. I wrapped it in plastic wrap. And then just stick it in the freezer for about 15 minutes. Once it's ready, we're going to roll the dough onto the plastic wrap. This is homemade dough, so it's more delicate and sticky than the store-bought stuff. You want to roll the dough in more of an oval shape, so it's enough to cover the 9 by 13 baking dish. And we're ready to assemble. I had another pot of awesomeness cooking for the second pie, and I poured it all into the baking dish. And yes, this pot is approximately 1,000 years old, and I love it. We're going to spread that meat out evenly like we did before. Then we're going to flip the pie crust right over the top, and then carefully peel that plastic away. Same drill as before, we're going to fold the sides over. If you need to even it out, just pick some dough off one side and add it to the other. We'll poke some vent holes in there, brush it again with the egg wash, and we'll also bake that in our preheated oven at 400 degrees for about 30 to 40 minutes until the crust is golden brown. So here's a look at Mrs. Mann's steak and sausage pie with the store-bought crust, which is the only way I've ever made it. And here's a look at the steak and sausage pie with the homemade crust, and this is the very first time I made it this way. And I'll tell you what, both ways are absolutely delicious. The homemade crust gives it a richer flavor, but the store-bought crust is easier to put together and lighter tasting. And now it's time to eat the bite. You might think this is weird, but I like to eat my steak and sausage pie over basmati rice. This pie is so incredible and one of my all-time favorites. You won't believe the flavor. It's so awesome and so addicting. I hope you give this recipe a try and that you enjoy this recipe as much as I do. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And a very special shout out to Mrs. Mann, who is no longer with us but leaves behind an amazing steak and sausage pie legacy to share with future generations. As always, you can find all the blog posts and recipes on my website at eatthebite.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.